Good evening. I'm here to give my informative speech on the history of lobotomies. I have my audience here with me. Everybody want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Kate's wife.
Everybody else?
Hi, I'm Roxanne.
Hi, I'm Tiana. I'm Keith's friend.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm Keith's friend.
Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm Keith's friend.
Excellent. So, in 1962, a man named McMurphy was committed to a mental hospital. While there, he rallied his other inmates into rebelling against the head nurse. As a result, he was taken to a special ward for patients deemed disturbed and received a lobotomy. Upon his release, his friend Chief made the remark, "There's nothing in the face, just like one of those store dummies." That was from the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. It was, for most of the public at large, the first time they'd ever heard of the procedure. While it's more well known today, there's still a great deal of mystery and misunderstanding surrounding it. Today, it's my hope that we might learn a little bit more about what lobotomy is and why it was eventually and rightfully banned from practice. First, I'll be giving a brief history of the procedure, followed by a description of how it was done using a few visual aids, and then finally outlining some of the common misconceptions and controversy of its practice that led to its demise as a medical procedure. In my own personal history, my more choice interests have led me to watch dozens of documentaries about the history of medical science, including quite a few about lobotomies. Over the years, it's become a punchline or general catch-all term for brain surgeries. The reality is much more interesting and disturbing than most people might realize. So I hope today we'll learn just a little bit more about what we spent so many years joking about. The original procedure, called a leucotomy, was invented in 1935 by a Portuguese neurologist by the name of Antonio Muniz. According to medical historian and neurologist Dr. Baron Lerner in a 2021 Live Science article, the behaviors doctors are trying to fix, they thought, were set down in neurological connections. The idea was if you could damage those connections, you could stop the bad behaviors. The behaviors they were trying to treat: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and other just very standard general mental conditions. Dr. Moniz's treatment involved drilling holes into the skull and pouring pure ethylene alcohol directly onto the brain matter, melting tissue. The side effects were understandably devastating. Vomiting, increased body temperature, vision damage, incontinence, and more were all reported. For this, Dr. Moniz won the Nobel Prize in 1949. In 1945, American neurosurgeon Walter Freeman would develop what he called the transorbital lobotomy, which was hailed for not leaving any scars and only taking about 10 minutes to perform. Looking back on it, it was seen as a miracle cure for mental disorders, but it was a cure more much in the same way that arsenic, uranium, mercury, and cocaine were. Not quite great. So according to a 2019 survey by Frontiers in Neuroscience, tens of thousands of lobotomies were performed under Freeman himself, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000. So how is a lobotomy performed? It starts with these. If these look like an ice pick and a mallet you get at a seafood restaurant, you're not that far off. An ice pick is exactly what inspired the procedure. So, the spike, called an orbitoclast, was inserted through the eye socket right about here in the corner of the eyeball. It was then hammered up into the frontal lobe, right in front of the thalamus, which you can see demonstrated right there. Once inserted, a retractable loop would be extended, and the orbitoclast would be rotated back and forth, severing connections. In the best cases, it might help, but for most, the after effects were far worse than their original condition. So take the cases of Rosemary Kennedy, sister of John F. Kennedy, and Howard Dooley. Both of these people likely had learning disabilities and displayed typical rebellious and depressive behaviors indicative of their respective home lives. Both of their famously domineering families had them forcibly and unknowingly lobotomized. Neither procedure went well. Howard was left even more depressive and spent years in and out of mental hospitals, battled drug and alcohol addictions, and suffered memory problems. Rosemary was barely human after hers. She was left with the mental capacity of an infant, unable to speak, move, control her own bodily functions, or arguably even think. At the time of their respective surgeries, Rosemary was 23 years old. Howard was just 12. Both of these procedures were carried out by Walter Freeman. In 1967, Freeman would perform what would be the last lobotomy ever performed in the United States on a woman named Helen Mortensen. It was actually her third. The procedure caused a brain hemorrhage that would quickly lead to her death. Because of this, Freeman would not be allowed to practice medicine ever again. Thankfully, around this time, Thorazine was introduced, ushering in a new age of mental health care, free of invasive surgeries, save for the most extreme cases. Over the years, lobotomy has become synonymous with erasing memories. We've often heard jokes about getting lobotomized as a way to forget specific memories and experiences. In reality, there really is nothing that can specifically and completely erase a memory outside of the brain's own chemistry. There's also been a widespread belief that they were only carried out forcibly on patients in mental hospitals. While it's true that a disturbing number of lobotomies were carried out in this manner, there were actually many that were performed on people who not only consented to them, but actively sought them out. Case in point, Helen Mortensen. While this procedure and others like it were arguably invented for noble purposes, the people involved were ultimately ignorant and misguided in their attempts to fix what they deemed to be broken people. Lobotomy and other seemingly barbaric procedures by today's standards were the result of the inability to understand mental illness and human individuality. The procedures that were supposedly created to help people ultimately did the exact opposite, and for many, made life a living hell. And ironically, a lack of education and understanding is exactly what led to the lobotomy becoming a parody of itself, used for comedic effect, even being referenced in the song Can't Watch This by Weird Al Yankovic. So hopefully, now you have somewhat of a better understanding and appreciation of not only what mental health care used to be like, but moreover, how far we've come since then and how much genuine help there is available for those in need. Like the conditions it was meant to help, education, empathy, and understanding can bring us a little closer to enlightenment about what was done to these innocent people, and hopefully lead us to better understand and appreciate how we view and treat mental illness today, not only in others, but also ourselves. Thank you.